Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm going to be talking to you in this module about comparison and contrast essays. And where we're going to start as far as breaking down what a comparison and contrast essay is talking about the basis of comparison, all right, and why that's important as you plan your comparison contrast essay. I will apologize up front. I'm using ScreenPal, and for whatever reason, it's not enabling me to put my presentations in slideshow mode. I'm not sure what's up with that, but nevertheless, we'll plow through this and get through it. As long as you guys can see the slides, I think that's what matters. But getting back to the basis of comparison, what is that and why is that important? First of all, think about what is the purpose. When you're going to compare two or more things, right, you're basically looking at how two or more things are alike. Now, if you're contrasting, you're looking at how two or more things are different. And comparison and contrast obviously is a combination of the two. Usually when we write comparison and contrast essays, the reason or the justification for the essay is that we're usually creating an argument. Now, this may not be true in every case, but it's true for the biggest majority of comparison and contrast essays. Generally, they're being set up as an argument because there may be a preference. For example, you may be attempting to argue why one thing is better than another. Why is one singer better than another? Why do you prefer one over the other? Who is your target audience? Who is the consumer for this essay? You might, for example, be comparing two products. Why would one product be a better buy for your money than another product, right? And again, like I said, not true in every case. There are cases sometimes where you just want to discuss, how two or more things might have similarities or differences. But you have to think about, first of all, what is the overall purpose? And where we start is looking at whether we have a valid basis of comparison. So that what that really boils down to is that the two or more things that we're comparing really have to have more things in common than differences. All right, let me repeat that. They need to have more things in common than differences. Because if they're too different, then you don't have a valid basis of comparison. All right, so let's start right here. We've got, for example, two ice cream flavors. So what is their basis of comparison? How do you compare chocolate to vanilla? We start with what they have in common. They're both ice cream flavors. Okay. They are both, even after all of these years, they're still the two most popular ice cream flavors. Usually, I think vanilla is number one. Usually chocolate is number two. Sometimes it flips, but you get the idea. So people might often kind of argue about, well, am I a chocolate person or am I a vanilla person? The textures are going to be very similar, right? But then beyond that, of course, then you can start to talk about the ways that chocolate and vanilla are different from each other, right? But I think this next slide probably better illustrates that concept. And so the question I'm raising here is, can you compare a horse to a fly? Can you? Now, I often pose that question in my composition classes, and I get sometimes all kinds of weird and crazy responses. Um, they're both animals, yeah, and I'll sometimes I'll have students say, well, they both have legs, yeah, maybe they both have ears, they both have eyes. But beyond that, can you really do anything with that? Not a lot, because a horse is a large mammal, right? A fly is a teeny tiny insect. They're not even in the same classification of animal. It makes no logical sense to try to compare these two things, these two animals, because the differences far outweigh the similarities. And it wouldn't make any sense to compose an essay and try to build that around comparing a horse to a fly. Now, let's think about it another way. If we have two animals from the same classification, the comparison becomes more valid. Can you compare, for example, a horse to a mule? Yes. Can you compare a horse to a cow? Yes. Because now you're getting much closer. The comparison has more validity, right? You're dealing with mammals. You're dealing with very large, four-legged, warm-blooded creatures. A fly, on the other, can you compare a fly to a wasp? Yes. Can you compare a fly to a bee? Yes. Because they're tiny winged insects, right? And they have more in common than differences. So let's consider, I call this the Battle of the Divas, right? Comparing Whitney Houston and Janet Jackson. This is a very, very valid comparison. Why? Because we're talking about two singers who are both female, same gender, both African American, same race, same generation. All right, they were both very popular in the 80s and 90s. My generation, right? Um, but they're still very, very much remembered today. Now, you could argue some split hairs here, like one is deceased, one is not, etc. But by and large, they have more similarities than differences. You know, even the genre of music that they sing is very similar, R&B, pop. But what happens if we, let's say, replace Whitney Houston with Madonna? We've still got some valid basis of comparison, but we've just widened it considerably by simply changing the race of one of the subjects. But other than that, they're still pretty close. I mean, they're still the same generation. They're still, I think, the same genre of music, pretty much. But yeah, we have widened that basis of comparison slightly. But let's widen it even more. What happens, for example, if we compare Janet Jackson to Nicki Minaj? We could still argue that they're two female artists, but they're from two totally different generations. And I would argue their genre of music is very different because Nicki is mainly a rapper, whereas Janet is more of an R&B singer. So it's not to say that you couldn't compare them, but what's happened here is that we've made that basis much wider. Now, what happens here if we compare Janet to Billie Holiday? Now we've really widened that gap of comparison because now we're in two totally different time periods. We're talking about two totally different genres of music, going from jazz to R&B. And then while we're in the Jackson family anyway, MJ versus MJ, right? This is a fun comparison. So their basis of comparison, right, is that they're both considered GOATs, right? Greatest of all time, but in two totally different fields. They were huge celebrities during the same time period, but beyond that, there's a lot of differences. So there's a short video that's going to follow this presentation that I'd like for you to watch. It actually shows a showdown between Michael Jordan and Michael Jackson, one on the basketball court and one dancing. Very hilarious, funny video. And I'd like for y'all to look at that and let's talk about some of those important similarities and differences between the two, even though they do have this basis of comparison, right? All right, so go watch that, and then I want you to come back to this last slide here.